community, of which I am one. Many of you have heard of the announcement of the indictment information that was shared by from Louisville, Kentucky in the Breonna Taylor case. The fact that we are having a conversation with our Black community tonight is a profound coincidence. So we are in a tender moment. We continue to be in multiple levels of pandemic. And I'm so grateful for this group of disciples who were willing to come on and share and have honest conversation for the whole church to participate in this conversation. I'm happy and honored to present my good friend, Reverend Verzola Law, who is also the senior minister at the Northway Christian Church in Dallas, Texas, who will serve as our moderator tonight. There will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. We are streaming live to Facebook on the Christian Church Disciples of Christ Facebook page, as well as our YouTube channel. So feel free to share your streams so that others can tune into this conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to Reverend Law. Thank you so much for being willing to moderate this conversation tonight, my friend.
Greetings. We welcome you with the joy of Jesus to this Love is an Action Word webinar. So glad to have you with us. I bring you greetings from Dallas, Texas. It is summer heat here, moving into the fall, and we are amazed at all that God is doing in spite of the challenges caused by COVID-19. And these are the moments where the church can gather and reimagine and be church. So delighted for our panel who are joining us today. And I want to invite them to introduce themselves really quickly. So you will see and hear their names for out of their own mouths for the first time. So we will do that. But before we do that, I want to let you know a little bit more about the National Convocation. And what better person to share with us about what it means to be in this National Convocation and what it means in light of the movement that is Black Lives Matter. As we talk about love is an action verb, it is part of our Christian ethic. But before we begin, beloved, let me say, we are in covenant. We are in covenant together. And as part of that covenant, we will honor one another by exercising loving language as we share through Facebook and YouTube and other social media platforms. When we ask questions, they will be screened, and we will honor the Jesus in you as you honor the Jesus in us as people share their stories. These stories are part of the sacred story. God has invited us to be in the story out of covenant with God. God loved us so much. John 3:16 says that God gave us God's only son. And whoever believes in that shall not perish, but have everlasting life. We are on the side of life. And especially as we look at what it means as love is an action word, and to live into that love ethic as we do this work together. So we encourage you to send in questions. We encourage you to chat with us. But remember that this is done out of the ethic of love. So before we begin, I want to let you hear a little bit more of the historical snapshot that you might understand the fullness of what it means to be in the National Convocation. And so we have our administrative secretary, the Reverend Dr. Timothy James. Could you tell us a little bit more about the National Convocation?
Thank you, Verzola Law, and all those who are on the panel with me. I'm so glad to have your accompaniment on this special conversation. The National Convocation is the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. It is the African-American constituent, or the membership of this church or this denomination. And our presence here is a demonstration of unity and wholeness. Oh yes, it has not been easy for the National Convocation to be in this church historically. However, we have made great bounds toward unity. The church began segregated, but because our Black leaders want the church to be whole and for the church to be real and relevant, we needed to tear down the segregation in the church. And so we have been here. We've been here since day one. And when the church started out in Cane Ridge on that mountainside, when they were preaching and having holy revival, We were there, but we were not counted as people, but now we are. We merged back in 1969 and have been working toward unity ever since. And so our presence here is also to help bring into life and vitality a major initiative of the church, that we would be a pro-reconciling, anti-racist church, that we would show unity to the world, and that our whole denomination would look like the face of the nation where everybody is welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now I will have each panelist to introduce themselves. You'll get to hear where they are from and how they are serving. And so I want to begin with Reverend Antonio Red.
Yes, my name is Antonio Red. I currently serve locally as the associate minister and assistant to the pastor at Second Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia, on the West End. I also am most recent the young adult president for National Convocation. Yeah, so that's me for the most part.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Iris Session.
Hello, everyone. Okay, here. Hello. I am Iris Session. I live in a small little suburb of Dallas called Cedar Hill. I serve as the co-pastor of the Gathering, a womanish church. I'm also recently installed as the president of the National Convocation. And I am really excited for this convocation. When I had the onboarding for the new officers, one of the first things I said was that I wanted to have some conversation around what does the National Convocation have to say about Black Lives Matter? So this is very timely, and I'm excited to be here.
Welcome, thank you. And Reverend Sherizna Jean-Marie. You're on mute.
Good evening, everyone. I am Reverend Sherizna Jean-Marie. And as I say my name this evening, I also want to say the name of our beloved sister who lost her life earlier this year and did not receive justice, Breonna Taylor. And I say her name with many emotions because as a Black woman in the church, in this world, I often wonder about justice for myself as I reflect on the life of Breonna Taylor and others. I serve as the director for Racial Justice Ministries at Scarrett Bennett Center, and I'm really grateful for being here. Thank you.
We have many persons behind the scenes, so we want to say thank you in advance for our online moderator and the ways in which we are having just a crew serving. Online audience facilitator is the Reverend Ray Kareem, pastor of First Christian Church in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'll be there one day when COVID lifts up. And so we have many others behind the screen, but we want to move forward with story. Psalm 78 tells us to tell the story and to tell the story of God so that the children yet unborn might rise and tell the story of God's hesed, God's faithfulness, God's covenant with us. And so we all have a story. It might not be as miraculous as Mary, the mother of Jesus. It might not be as bold as Vashti or as submissive and surrendering and obedient as Esther, or it might not be as fiery as those who found themselves in the fiery furnace, but we have a story. And so we want to hear from each of the panelists and their story about how they are experiencing this moment. Different communities tell all different kinds of stories about themselves and their practices, about their theology. And particularly, we want to hear the story of how Black people are doing, how Black disciples and our communities, how we're being impacted by this moment where racism and racialized tension is more overt. This moment where we talk about Black Lives Matter in very specific ways, in very public ways, in very open ways. This moment, this historical moment, the pandemic caused by COVID-19. And so we find ourselves at many intersections in this moment, and we want to hear from each panelist their story. So they have about 3 to 5 minutes to share their story. We want to begin with Antonio Red. Tell us what's up.
For me, I feel like my story is told in the work that I do daily. I tell and share in different ways. My sharing happens through my preaching, but my telling happens when I'm able to witness through people, to people on a daily basis out here, outside of the confines of the church wall, what it is that we're experiencing as Black people in this day and time, in this season, especially as a Black father. I tell my story out of the premise of a Black father, because I have to raise children who will have to experience these same happenings when they grow up and then when they are my age. And so I have to not only teach them how to live life, but I also have to teach them how to live life being a Black male and a Black female. I have a daughter and a son. And so that's the struggle in recognizing and realizing my story, is that my story isn't just I wake up in the morning and go to work, come back home and eat dinner or and chill out with my family. I wake up in the morning and I have to work and chill, but I also have to experience all of those other things as a Black male who is disenfranchised, who is oppressed, who is experiencing these things that are so traumatizing. Although they make individuals that we have seen the faces brutalized and persecuted in the streets, crucified in the streets, although they may not be our our relatives per se, they are our relatives. And so when we see one of them experience these things, it hits us as if it was our child, as if it was our son or our daughter. And so we have to not only deal with that, we also have to deal with life, but we also have to share these stories with our children and with our friends and family members, how to move in this space and how difficult it is moving in this space. And one day hoping that in sharing our stories, we'll find a way to freedom, find a way to be relieved of these pressures. So that's how I share and how I tell.
Thank you. Thank you. Ashe. Ashe. Reverend Dr. Irie, can you give us an update on the story, the communities in which you occupy and find yourself, the practices and the theology about how Black people are doing and how Black disciples are doing, in particular in this time of racialization in our country being more exposed in COVID-19?
Thank you so much, my sister friend, for the question. I will start this way. I remember several years ago, Reverend Brazola, you and I were having a conversation after I experienced quite a bit of pain, I think related to the intersection of racism and sexism. And I remember you telling me, tell your own story. And so that is what I do. I tell my story by writing. I tell my story by having a very active social media presence and speaking my truth and my perspective on what I see happening in the world. I, by nature, am a learner and a teacher. And so I see myself in all situations as teaching, as trying to enlighten and inform, particularly around those issues that people find taboo and uncomfortable talking about. I have never been one who lacked boldness. And so I use that to tell the story, my story, but my story is so much like other people's stories, other women's stories. I am obviously a Black woman who is a womanist practitioner. And so my story is through that lens. It is always about bringing the community with me. It is always about this notion of traditional communalism and redemptive self-love, and always about what can I do or say to make the community better. In the Dallas area where I live, I tell the story by involvement with an organization called the Dallas Black Clergy. And the Dallas Black Clergy, there are, let's see, about 10 of us, 10 pastors. And because I think it's important to say people's names, I do want to share the names of the people that are part of the Dallas Black Clergy for safety, equity, and justice. And so we are very involved in the Dallas area in pushing for things like a living wage, like removal of white supremacist monuments, which those things have happened in our city because of our efforts. We are concerned about affordable housing. And so that is part of how I tell the story with my life of working for justice for the marginalized and socially excluded communities. But on the Dallas Black Clergy are Dr. Mike Green and Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III and Dr. Kwesi Kemal and Reverend Fia Kennedy and Dr. Marcus King and Reverend Jamie Kalasar and Edwin Robinson, and my co-pastor at the gathering, Reverend Camilla Hall Sharp and Dr. Michael Waters. And so we are very vocal in the Dallas area and very involved. We have often press conferences regarding various issues that are happening, but we go to city council meetings and we write potential policy and all of these kinds of things, right? Because our people are hurting, and our people, I think, are looking for and leadership, are looking for a way out of the mess that we're in. And so we have, because of our love and because we are pastors, we have that concern. And the church where I pastor, right, my story is told as a result of being co-pastor of the gathering, a womanist church, right, which is very specific, which is concerned again about anti-racism, that is concerned about racial equity, which is concerned about LGBTQ inclusion, that is concerned about dismantling what we call PMS, patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism. All of these social ills make it difficult or almost impossible for our people to flourish. And so I share my story by writing. We have a book that's coming out called The Gathering. In fact, it's been released, right? Here it is, right here, The Gathering, A Womanist Church, right? Where we share the stories, our stories, but the stories of our ministry partners, right? Who have joined us in this work of being a faith community. And so they share their stories. And so stories are all over the place. And people are understanding the words of our Lord, right? That our silence will not protect us. And so we tell our stories and we speak and we act.
The power of story. Love is an action word as we continue to have this conversation as National Convocation and Black Lives Matter. We're coming next to the Administrative Secretary and Associate General Minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. He is in his retirement last months. And so we greet you with the joy of Jesus and honor your gifts. We honor you and the commitment you have. I remember when the James boys used to sing at Black Ministers Retreat and the singing and the prophetic witness. So let's hear your story. What is the Black church, Black disciples? How are we experiencing this moment, this intersection of racialization that's happening and more exposed in our country and during COVID-19 in particular?
Thank you. And this question is so pertinent at this time, and particularly for the church. Even while we were in the midst of having to do church differently, the church is not closed. And I'm a member of the World Christian Church, and our interim pastor, Janae Pitts Murdoch, has done a massive job in keeping our church active, vitally, and online with communications and involvement. One thing, we have always been a church where we believe in giving to the community. We have a food pantry that serves every week. And then every morning at 7 o'clock, we have a prayer line for folk to call in and pray to start the day that way. And in the midst of everything going on, and we see how COVID-19 has impacted our community with disproportionate numbers of illnesses and deaths, we are reminded, that, we struggle. And because of racism and what it has done through the years, this COVID has more or less snatched the covers off of America's historic racism. And as Will Barber says, how it seeps through the cracks. And so we are seeing so many vulnerable areas in the Black community. And it directly comes back to our churches because our members are there. And so we're doing what we can to reach out to them and to help them. But I gotta be honest and say, prayer makes a difference. Black people, particularly Christians, believe in the power of prayer. And I'm a preacher, son of a preacher, but personally for me, prayer has made a difference. I love it, the fact that our general minister and president leads out in prayer and encourages folk to pray. And a church needs to be encouraged to pray constantly because what we are facing is bigger than us. It's bigger than the church, but it's not bigger than God. So we need to be in contact and in relationship with God who can help us through all of this. And going back again, looking at history, I remember how Antonio said, he's a father. I'm a father and a grandfather. I have grandsons and daughters, and I have sons and daughters, and I'm concerned about their well-being in the future. And I want this nation to be a place where they can grow and mature and raise their families and be respected and not fear what will happen in the company of white police. It's a shame that we have come this far and things have not changed over the years. And one thing about the church and our anti-racism initiative, we get to call it out. And I can recall when I was beginning ministry, I went to college at Culver Stockton College, and my professor was the religion professor and regional minister for that area. And he had to sit me down in his office to tell me, Timothy, these churches do not want us to send Black students for leadership. And so I had to sit in my religion classes and watch my classmates come back on the weekend talking about their 2 and 3 churches they served, and I served none because of the color of my skin, okay? And when I moved to Indianapolis, it was the same situation. I figured I could get a job in the local church there. No, I had to leave state to get experience because, again, white churches were not ready for Black leadership. And so it's sad that we have to live like this and come through, but we are praying things get better, and they have. And growing up, Dad pastored churches. There was the only Black church in those areas, the only Black disciple church in those areas. So we did what we could to get along with the fellow disciples. Okay, so that helped me, to get some understanding and acclimation into that. But the issue of racism still stands, and so it really begins with loving yourself, knowing that you are somebody. And then if you respect yourself, you have the right to demand it from everyone else. So I could go on with many stories about racism in society and the church, but we've come to a day now where we can say, let's work together and solve all these issues, because it's too many of them.
It's too many. And when you add layer on top of layer at the intersections, my story is so much like yours. I could do the church camps.
Yeah.
Be the church counselor. I could sing so low that sometimes you can't hear me. But I mean, but when it came to the charge, there was a church I had to drive way out because they were not ready for me in the 90s. And it continues to be the story today. Thank you for the exposing the sin that is racism, the brokenness, the estrangement that racism caused between God and us as humans. These are very times the Selah is one of the journals of Convocation. So this is a Selah read. We will go now to one who has served in colleges, one who served in a local church, and now who has found a new platform to move us and shake us towards justice. Tell us the story, Reverend Jerizna, of Blackness in this time, Black disciples in particular, of racialization being exposed more fully, as well as this time of COVID-19. What's up?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And again, I'm grateful for the invitation to be here, to be with family. I currently serve in the community. I'm reminded consistently that I'm pastoring in the community. And so when I think about the community and the impact of the moment and how to tell the story, I appreciate the question because the question is a reflection of appreciating and acknowledging the humanity of Black folks at a time where our humanity is really tender and our humanity is consistently questioned because of what we are asked to bear. We sit in two pandemics, a pandemic that we all know so well, racism, and a new pandemic that affects our breathing. And so when we think about how the Black community, the Black church is doing in this moment and how to package it in a story, I think about the community I serve, which is also IRE session, social media. We had to go virtually this year. The COVID-19 pandemic took us out of the four corners of the church and the buildings and took us into an unfamiliar space that calls us to speed up our technology savvy and intelligence. Because technology has been here for years, but it took us a while to get here. And here's a pandemic that says, you going too slow, come on and hurry up. And what the virtual space has done is expand our reach in telling our stories and sharing our stories. And so when the question is asked, how are Black people and how are Black disciples doing in this moment? We must name our emotions. And I'm clear that historically, Black emotions publicly is dangerous. But when we publicly announce and declare how we're doing and share our emotions, what we do is remind ourselves and others that we are human, And so my experience in my community is many of us are angry. We are angry, we are enraged because we are still here in 2020. Many of us are hurt, heartbroken. We have seen death way too much in such a short period of time. And so many of us are questioning our own life and what does death mean for us, and if we are next. Because death has come knock on our doors and our neighbors' doors and our loved one doors way too much in such a short period of time. So we're reminded of how tender life is. Many of us are questioning, what does it mean to be a Black American in this country?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be a Black man in this country? What does it mean to be a Black woman in this country? What does it mean to be a Black parent raising Black children in this country? Many of us have a lot of questions about what it means to exist in this country, in this world. I believe many of us are also asking the question, where is God? And what does justice looks like when we're consistently being denied justice? What does justice look like, and where is God? I believe the church has learned how to lament Good Friday when Jesus dies on the cross and gives up his spirits and die on the cross. And I believe the church has learned how to celebrate Easter Sunday. But here we are in two pandemics, and we are forced to live in Saturday. So the question for me is, what does the church do in a moment where people are living in Saturday in every which way, where hope is dead? Our dreams are dead. Jesus was dead on Saturday, and many of us are sitting right in Saturday, where many of us feel our lived experience is Jesus is dead. And we move too quick to hope. We move too quick to Sunday when many of our realities sit right in Saturday. So when you ask, how's the Black church doing and how's the Black community doing, you can find us on Easter Saturday. That's where we are. Many of us are sitting in silence because we have no words, Dr. Timothy James, to pray. How do we utter words in a time where our heart is literally broken and we have no words to speak of our experience? So I'm grateful for scripture that reminds us that when we have no words, the Spirit helps us in our groaning, in our moaning. But the truth is, the Black community, the Black church, Black people, we are sitting in Saturday. That is where we are. That is our story in this moment, Easter Saturday.
As we tell the story, we have more questions, and you will hear more of our panelists' stories. I confess that I am not my best self, and this last week, and especially yesterday, when the verdict came down concerning those who murdered Breonna Taylor, my back was already bracing itself for the verdict that came. And that pain shows up in our bodies, and it shows up in so many ways. And our faith sometimes is all we have. And so as we come to this next question, I really want to give you opportunity to open up more of your story. That was just the first question. We got to get to know each other, beloved. And so as we are sharing ourselves with you, that was just the first intro to who some of the panelists are, but we will dig deeper as we have these questions and open up this space where love is shown. This love is an action word. So the first question, how does your faith inform the way you respond to racism? I want to keep going in the same order, and everybody might not answer every question. So if you want to pass, we open ourselves up because we're learning to be gentle to ourselves. How does your faith respond to racism? Anybody want to jump in?
My faith responds to racism. My faith informs all the work that I do, because if I am a follower of Christ, and what I share with people all the time is we find Christ in the streets more than we find Christ in the church. And we have become a people that have flipped the script and found ourselves more so in the church than we have found ourselves more so in the streets. And because of the fact that we can't be found out there with the people while the people are struggling, that's why when we are in distress, all hell breaks loose. And so I have to find myself with the people, sharing with the people, so that when it comes to the point to where it can be said, did Christ show up? I can say for myself that I brought Christ with me. And so in these times, in these Saturday moments that seem endless for us, my faith continues to inform me that I always have to be present, not only for myself, not only for my family, but I have to be present for people who are continuing to mourn day in and day out. And I have to share with them a sense of hope, even when it's a struggle for me to find hope. But if I just sit on my praying, which is nothing wrong with that, because I dare say that prayer isn't the answer, but prayer is the answer. But I love what Frederick Douglass said when he said that praying wasn't enough for him because he had to pray with his feet to find freedom. And I think we are in a day and time when we have to begin to not only pray on our knees, but begin to stand up and pray with our feet in order for us to find freedom in this day and time, carrying the same Christ that went into the temple and destroyed the temple because he was angry. If we take that Christ with us into places that seem to not see our anger as a way of getting out, but see our anger as a way of coming against a system in a way that is trying to harm someone, we'll never find ourselves coming out of these moments. And so I take this anger, that same anger as that Christ took outside of the confines of these walls into the streets, sharing with the people, speaking what needs to be said, so that we might be able to speak that truth to the powers that be, our local legislators who needs to hear from us, not just at the White House, but at our city halls, as Sister Irie said, at our city hall meetings. We need to find them where they are and hold them accountable for what we have elected them to be. And that's
preachers,
in a
these
sense
preachers, that's my brother. I hear
what
it.
my faith has informed me.
Good. I want to keep it moving. Watch your voice, Reverend. That's what we say. But passion comes through in your faith and how we move from that personal, right, to that communal ethic. Thank you, Reverend Antonio. That's some preaching and some heart work, head and heart work. Thank you for that look into your own perspective of liberation theology and how that informs your faith. I want to open that up to about one or two of you. How does your faith inform the way you respond to racism? How does your faith?
Yeah, I want to take that question if that's okay, because I think, so I tell my staff at Scarrett Bennett Center this: I am so grateful that I'm serving at a faith-based organization, even though we're not a church, doing racial justice work, because I am clear that racism is a demonic force. This is spiritual warfare. And I am clear that my human hands alone cannot dismantle white supremacy. That this is literally the co-laboring of the divine and humanity coming together. We wrestle not with flesh and blood. I'm clear that this is spiritual warfare. And one of the greatest demons that walks with racism is the spirit of deception, especially in the church. And so when we think about what does it mean to love our brothers and sisters as it relates to racism, we're deceived to think that our loving our brothers and sisters mean that we must be nice and polite, right? And what it means to be a Christian is to be nice and polite and to not stir the waters. That's a lie from the pit of hell. And that's the lie that paralyzes the church from diving deep to do this work in dismantling white supremacy. To do this work, we must be prophetically honest about what it means to come together, and even this concept of we are family. We are together and love is an action. If we're going to be honest, so for me, my faith informs me as it relates to racism is to teach the truth, to talk about who Jesus was, to go back to the Gospels and to reflect the fire and passion Jesus had against these social norms that literally tried to assume the church's role of what it means to be loved. And so my faith informs me to love my brothers and sisters by correcting, by stirring the waters, by disturbing norms that's in our churches that allows us to pray together, yet we still have gazes that's dehumanizing. Like literally, we are in a church where racism and prayer can live together. We live in a church where we can proclaim God's gospel and yet still proclaim words of hate because of the color of one's skin, because of the way someone loves. And so it is for me, in terms of my faith tells me that it is our responsibility to teach the truth, to make demons uncomfortable in our presence, literally, even if it means that our brothers and sisters are uncomfortable in our presence because they sit in spaces where hate is a norm, racism is a norm. And so we think this is the way of life. This is the way of being. I'm reminded that in this country, white churches would worship on Sunday mornings, and in the basement of their church were enslaved folks. Now we got to tell the truth and shame the devil. And so for me, my faith put me in a place where I understand that this is a battle for my soul and yours. And if I'm going to do this work with you, I'm going to have to be honest with you and hold you accountable about how you see me and how you understand love and justice.
Love is an action word. And the Black Lives Matter movement. It is not an event. This is indeed a movement. James Baldwin is known for saying the church is in great danger when it knows what it should do, but it does not do it.
Amen.
When the church reads the Bible, when the church gathers for worship, when the church proclaims what thus says the Lord, living God loved us, dying, Jesus saves us, buried, he carried our sins far away, rising, he justified, he freed us, each of us forever. And so we have more questions that we want to raise, but are there any other panelists that want to share about how your faith informs how you respond to racism?
Thank you. I'd like to just share briefly that, being a PK, we had to prove ourselves that we could be real people, be banned, all that kind of stuff. But my father preached a sermon one time that impacted me. He said, the sermon was entitled, I Believe in Miracles. And the miracle he believed in was that he learned to love white people. Dad was raised in Mississippi, born prior to the Depression, knee deep in racism, segregation, discrimination, and lynching All of those things were going on around him, and he survived. And in ministry and walking with the Lord, talking with the Lord, he was able to preach to a Black congregation that it takes a miracle for him to love white people. And I gotta admit, I pray for that miracle too. It was good I was raised and Martin Luther King was preaching, because he impacted me with nonviolence, because I find myself, I could be awful angry, but the Bible says be angry and sin not. Sometimes it's hard almost not to do that. But thank God for faith that gives you a restraint, because the love of Christ constrains us from overreacting and getting too violent at times. But I would say faith for my life has made a difference, in that I realize, and as I look around and see what's ahead of us as a people, we need to collaborate and work together. We need to work with other churches, other preachers, other denominations, and other races to change the narrative in this nation that has gone on so long, the narrative that says white is supreme and Black is inferior. Too many people have bought into that. But it's time that we talk it out, teach it out, preach it out, and work it out, and bring this nation to equality and justice. Because as long as we have that mentality of supremacy and inferiority, we will always have problems, because somebody wants to be on top of somebody else with their foot on their neck, and that needs to be stopped.
I tell you, we have so much more to tell in the story, and I'm watching the time slip, so we will have many more conversations. Conversations is a spiritual discipline. We are in the Jesus ethic, following the model of love, when he would sit down long enough to have conversations with those he loved and those he was making room to experience love as the church was opening and the movement being built. And so, Dr. Ari, I want to send this one to you, being a new church planter. Is there a time when your congregation or community has experienced intense change or shift? Underneath that question is for to hear, how has this moment shifted how you respond? I know the word we're saying pivot. How has this moment of COVID-19 and racialization shifted the story you tell about the country, about the church, or about God? We got you on mute.
Of course, this period of COVID has changed the way we do church, the way we connect with each other, the way we worship. It is virtual for us, and yet we continue to tell the story. We continue to show up for each other, even in virtual space. We encourage our ministry partners, and because I'm saying ministry partners because that's what we call our, some people call them members, but we have ministry partners, and we're very intentional about that. But the story, I would say the story that we've always told is the same in terms of what Jesus' mission was, right? In Luke 4, where he talks about, that he has been anointed, right, to set the captives free, to open the eyes of the blind, and that is how we saw and see our ministry still. But the ways in which we carry that out now during COVID-19 has shifted. What has happened, though, it has opened up more creativity among our ministry partners. More ministries have started. We are working to provide home-cooked meals for people who are food insecure. And we just last week, week before, we provided 150 home-cooked meals, right? And so it has shifted in a sense of opening up more opportunities for ministry. Our story is not just about charity, because that is what, for me, we see feeding food insecure people, right? That is charity. But we also marry the charity with social justice, with affordable housing, fighting for affordable housing, fighting for a living wage, and those kinds of things. And so we want to tell the whole story, right? And part of the story is the charity piece, but the whole story is the only reason there is a need for charity is because there is some injustice in the system that places people in vulnerable positions. And so I would say that is a way that our church has shifted, because it provides more opportunity for ministry.
You know, I've been a part of the church so long, the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. I'm fourth generation, and we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. And I wonder what hope for systematic transformation looks like, because God is powerful, and our nation has testified against Black folk once again. They has not showed us that we are fully beloved. In fact, it was in the Constitution that we were 3/5 human. And so much of the treatment of African Americans continues to feel that way. What does the church have to say? What are some of the concrete ways that people can support the National Convocation? What are concrete ways we can support Black lives? Black lives matter. What are the concrete ways that we can support the Poor People's Campaign? So many more questions are coming, and we cannot fill them all, but I want to come back to those who want to jump in there. What are some of the concrete ways? How do we begin to name this powerful transformation that we're in the middle of a movement?
Well, I know I just finished, but I want to say this in response to that question, particularly as it relates to the National Convocation, right? I think people will feel more compelled to give when they see us as Black disciples, as Black leaders, showing up where we need to show up, showing up in marches, showing up in City Hall, showing up at Black Lives Matter movements, right? Writing about it, and not just being comfortable, you know, in our own places of abode, of worship, but we have to show up. And I know that in our tradition, that in the Black disciples, there are some who do show up, but I think we need to see a movement. I think we need to see a Black disciples movement to where we are really taking this seriously and being available and being present to where we can be accounted.
I want to take that on, if that's okay, in terms of what are concrete ways the church can show up and be the church. And I believe there are a number of different ways, but what the work we're doing at Scarrett Bennett Center is we are shifting the narrative from white allyship to co-conspirator. We're shifting the narrative we see and understand our work, because white allyship comes with an assumption that racism is a Black person's problem, that white people come to help. Racism is a human issue. It's a human problem. And it is primarily the work of white people to dismantle, because white people have the privilege and power to dismantle white supremacy in white spaces. Black people, the work of Black people is to heal from racial trauma. It's to heal from racial trauma. And so here's some concrete ways you can be the church. White churches, stop calling on Black people, Black leaders, Black churches to perform a kind of racial reconciliation conversation, and really have some strategic plans about what your church can do beyond words, right? Beyond a conversation with a Black pastor, right? Literally what you can do, concrete, is to come up with a strategic plan to work on, get a curriculum on anti-racism work. You don't need Black people to do the work of anti-racism. Black people do not need to have a conversation about white fragility, white privilege. That's your work to do. And so concrete, you can just take a claim that whether we believe it or not, our brothers and sisters are saying this is a problem for us. You want to be my family? I'm telling you this is a problem. And so you come and stand with me by going to your church in your community and doing the work by educating yourself, by doing the hard conversations, getting uncomfortable, to learn about what racism is and how you can use your white privilege to dismantle it. Black people, stop accepting these invitations to have these pointless conversations where we're re-triggering ourselves. Take the time in your community to find resources to heal. Psychologically, it's a problem to consistently seeing and hearing death because of the color of your sin. It weighs on our souls. And it is our responsibility to take on our healing, because healing has a generational impact. And so the concrete way is simply to take the stance to say, I'm going to do my part to educate myself. I'm going to do my part to have the hard conversations, and I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up to help change policy. I'm going to show up at the polls to vote, and my vote, understanding that my vote is not just about me and my family, but my vote has an impact on the least of these. And so how I vote, how I have conversations, how I show up, it's not just about me, but it's about the ones Jesus told the church to take care of, the least of these.
So we have questions and we don't have enough time. We have stories and we will find ways to continue to find healing space for these stories. I say that I have a therapist, a coach, a body energy healer, intercessors. It takes all of that to stay well in general in this pandemic for Black lives that matter in particular. And so, beloved, as we begin to bring this time to a close, I want to thank these panelists for sharing your heart today. Do what you need to do to take care of you. Because the church still has a long way to go. Many of our African-American clergy are bivocational, trivocational. I remember for 12 years of my ministry, I was 3% pension when the pension says 14%. That time has to be. So there are many more stories, but those stories have impact. And there's a generation watching, waiting for us to do better. And so love is an action word. And there are concrete ways through our reconciliation ministry office that we can find how to move into that. There are ways that we can move into that with Convocation as we continue to grow. There are ways, as each of the panelists have said, that we need to move from our personal houses to the State House, to the White House. It's time to be better. Love is an action word. Want to give you an opportunity to learn more about Reconciliation Ministry as I bring on April Johnson.
Well, friends and family, you have heard some of the stories. And I just want to invite you to begin to craft your own story around the reality that Black lives matter. Part of the sin of racism is the lie that two things cannot be true at the same time. So I invite you sometime before this closes or after this closes to first just say their names. say the names of those who have been lost to the systemic erasure of their humanity. I believe that was the essence of the stories that you heard tonight. That we cannot continue to call ourselves pro-reconciling and anti-racist Christians if we are not standing up, showing up, and speaking up for the continued erasure of the humanity of Black lives. Then secondarily, I would ask you to engage in a spiritual practice. Invite one or two other people to pray with you, to fast from a distraction, or to engage, as Dr. Irie reminded us, in a writing project to discern God's guidance for your call to dismantle systemic racism. And then lastly, I invite you to offer your financial generosity to Reconciliation Ministry so that the story can continue to be told, and so that those who are coming behind us and those who are even with us can continue to do the work, to show up at the voting polls, to show up for those who cannot show up for themselves, to stand up and to tell the story. And that the story is not a binary, it's not either or, and it's not an individual story. It is our story. So I invite you to continue your generosity to this ministry of reconciliation so that our story might be one of dismantling systemic racism. And in particular tonight, the erasure of the humanity of Black lives. I want to thank our panelists and thank all of you all who have joined us. We have over 200 people on Facebook live with us and on this webinar. And I just ask that you all will continue to stay on the wall doing this important work. Thank you so much for all of you who shared your story and your vulnerability. Keep telling the story. Keep being compelled to do the work of what it means to be Christ disciples. Good night.
Good night. Thank you for your leadership. God bless you. Love you with the love of the Lord. Do better, be better. Listen, love is an action word, and Black lives matter.